The Miami Heat finally closed it out in 7 to make their 6th NBA Finals under head coach Erik Spoelstra. Waiting on the other side has been the Denver Nuggets, who are headed to the first in their franchise's history. These two teams see each other twice a year, and with countless injuries, lineup changes, and the regular season just being a bit different, we don't have much prior knowledge of these teams matching up strategically. But I still think this is a fascinating series. The Nuggets are the best offensive team in the NBA, and that's been a pretty big story as they just met the #1 defense in LA and absolutely torched them. Through 3 rounds, they've recorded a near 121 offensive rating, one of the highest marks in NBA history, and they do it in a variety of ways, including tons of movement and screening, lots of passing, and multiple actions on any given possession. Everything they do, though, goes through 2-time MVP Nikola Jokic, so naturally it starts there for Miami's game planning. Lineup-wise, they have a lot of really tough questions to answer pertaining how they want to approach the big man. In 14 of their 18 playoff games thus far, they've started with a double big lineup consisting of Kevin Love at the 4 next to Bam Adebayo, so that they can keep more size and rebounding on the floor without losing any of their spacing on offense. But against such a well-rounded attack like Denver, where exactly does Love fit defensively? We've seen some teams throw their best rim protector on Aaron Gordon to play a sort of free safety role camping near the paint, but unlike those other bigs, he's not a guy who's going to roam down and offer actual resistance down low. So putting him on Gordon is almost useless, and only leaves him vulnerable to be attacked, as AG's an elite cutter and interior finisher who can handle the ball in space. Or put Love in ball screen action with Jokic as a spacer, and that just causes all sorts of problems. I've seen a few people float the idea of doing what the Lakers did with Hachimura and use Love as a body on Jokic with Bam as the helper, and while this would do a much better job of neutralizing Gordon, now you're relying on Love to be the defensive big in every primary action, defending pick and rolls, handoffs, and trying to cover vast amounts of space, which just wouldn't really work. For these reasons, I think their best move is to throw Bam on Jokic and stick with that smaller lineup we saw against Boston to close out the series, starting Caleb Martin at the 4 to keep more speed and athleticism out there. Now, without as much size, the question becomes how much Bam can limit Jokic in isolation. Although Bam's pretty strong, athletic, and has length, that's still a pretty big advantage for Joker, just using his body to back his way in deep and finish over the top. Here it is again, working his way to the front of the restricted area, where he goes to a half spin to create a wide open layup. Bam has to sell out on the release just to get a proper contest, and Jokic loves to use all types of fakes and spins to carve out these finishes. And again, in this construct, you're playing just one guy over 6'8", so there isn't really a second rim protector to help take away the paint. That's not to say Bam's completely useless, as he's had some really good possessions against bigger post players and will definitely make Jokic work, but I think where he can be most impactful is on the entry. Denver clears the side of the floor for Jokic to post up, but Bam fronts hard, with Lowry roaming over from the weak side, which creates a small window of opportunity and forces a turnover. Here it is again, Strus comes over to double, so Jokic kicks it out for a repost, but on the entry, Bam jumps the lane to not let him get the ball back. Now, he will still get his touches, because not only is he great at sealing position, but the Nuggets run him through all kinds of screens, cuts, and actions to get to his spots, and he can initiate the play himself and back down from the perimeter. So once he gets the ball, what will Miami's defense look like? One key for them throughout these playoffs, and especially in the conference finals, has been throwing out a zone. But Jokic is maybe the best player at countering a zone we've ever seen. That's because the most common way to break a zone is by getting the ball to the middle of the floor, and Jokic is better at operating from these spots than anyone. Miami tried hitting him with a zone earlier in the season, and they got punished, just touch passing it to the corner for a great look from 3. It's not just his passing you have to worry about either. He'll hunt smaller players in the zone and seal position down low for easy scoring opportunities, and if you sell out to protect the paint from that, Denver has the passing and cutting ability to take advantage of that open space. And that's what makes defending Jokic so difficult, the unique manner in which he makes defenses pick their poison. but with how much movement they want in their offense, I actually think if Miami can force them into isolating Jokic at great volume, those are good defensive possessions, because although he is incredibly efficient, it takes away from what they really want to do. I think then you'll see them mix in multiple looks to keep him guessing, throwing some single coverage, maybe some double teams, but if they're gonna bring in extra help, they need to make sure it's masked. If he can see an extra defender coming, it'll open up too much passing. The idea here is to prevent him from getting others involved as much as you possibly can, and that's because the supporting guys can all swing games as a potential X factor. Specifically against smaller units, like I earlier mentioned with the Heat, Aaron Gordon could be one of those guys. In a regular season game back in December, they actually ran their fourth quarter offense through Gordon post-ups against Kyle Lowry, and although Lowry's real sturdy and generally holds up well, that size and strength is just too much to handle down low. And he'll do these sorts of things to anyone: quick duck-ins, deep seals, baseline cuts, putbacks, just so physically overwhelming with his unique combination of agility and strength. This feels like the obvious Jimmy Butler matchup for two different reasons. One is that Jimmy's pretty strong and physical himself, which allows him to defend Gordon down low pretty well. And the second is that Gordon's the weakest shooter of the starting five, so this enables Butler to play that free safety role I briefly touched on. It's not quite like what we've seen from other guys, where he's roaming down to protect the paint, but instead making tons of high leverage plays on the ball, timely rotations, and taking away routine passing lanes. If Butler can take away dump offs to Gordon and keep him off the offensive glass while rotating down to cutters, Miami's in pretty good shape down low. That still leaves a 6'10" Michael Porter Jr. on the wing though, and the Heat are starting to run out of size. They explored throwing Kyle Lowry on him to get under his handle and make him uncomfortable, and while this did take away some of what he can do when putting the ball on the floor, he's one of the best off-ball shooters in the game as both a spot-up and when running off of screens, and with such a high release point, he's able to just rise right over the top of smaller guys without much difficulty. He's also an athletic finisher and yet another guy who can crash the offensive glass, so I would expect him to throw Caleb Martin on him, 6'5" with a 6'10" wingspan, or maybe even some extended time for Haywood Highsmith, 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan, and live with the results in hopes that he doesn't go on an absolute heater to single-handedly swing games off of tough shot making. That pretty much covers the front court. But I think the toughest area to crack in this Denver offense though is how in the world you defend the two-man game between Murray and Jokic, that they just relentlessly go to time and time again versus the game's best defensive players with virtually the exact same success. Miami's first instinct is always to switch, but against Jokic that really isn't an option because of how easily he abuses mismatches regardless of where he catches the ball. After a switch, you either have to let him score and hope he misses, or send multiple bodies to get the ball out of his hands, to which he'll probably make the right play, and that's much tougher to cover than just playing the pick and roll straight up. As a ball handler, Murray's unique in that he has the 3-level threat, pulling up for threes, patiently playing the in-between game, or exploding on drives, with the passing ability to take advantage of whatever the defense gives him. Part of what makes these actions so difficult to defend is how much shooting Denver puts on the floor. At 38.6%, they're second in the playoffs in three-point shooting, after a regular season where they finished 4th. And it's not just high-quality spot-up shooters, but legit perimeter shot makers. This means that Miami won't be able to sink into driving lanes as much, and may have to play it 2v2 more than they'd like, but they can still explore gapping at times to make Jamal more uncomfortable. On kickouts though, they have to close out hard to not give up those threes, make these guys put the ball on the deck and make plays. The Heat arguably do a better job than any other team at aggressively playing driving lanes and preventing the ball from touching the paint, and the Nuggets are dead last in drives throughout these playoffs at just 34.5 a game, so making them switch up their approach can probably force some errors. Now, there will definitely be times where they have to concede some opportunities, but if they mix up the look, they can force Murray into tougher decisions on the fly, as he's a guy who would rather score than anything else. But with Bam, what do you throw out there? Switching just isn't a viable option. You don't want to blitz and give Jokic a numbers advantage, but also can't play in a deep drop to give Murray the pull-up jumper. And this is where I think Bam's unique physical profile comes up big. He's one of very few big men who are agile enough to step up to the level of the screen and bother jump shooters while recovering to protect the paint. So I think either a high drop or a quick hedge are the best options. They also have to ask the same questions when defending dribble handoffs to KCP and MPJ, guys who want to come off and shoot and will pull through traffic, but can both put it down when needed, which is more on the guys chasing them than anything. They'll have to navigate these screens and run them off the line where help is ready to protect the interior. But what about those minutes where Jokic is sitting on the bench? Denver throws out this small ball switch everything lineup. Throughout this run, it's been Murray, Bruce and Christian Brown, Jeff Green, and Gordon as the smaller five. Let's just say the offense in these minutes is a complete disaster, marking just a putrid 107.5 offensive rating through 3 rounds. And that certainly lines up with the eye test, as virtually every single possession revolves back to let Jamal cook, move out of the way, and every other attempt occurs at the end of the shot clock. Miami may have found something last series, with Haywood Highsmith at the 5 to counter, just matching versatility with more versatility. A guy like Kyle Lowry can legitimately switch across the board against this unit, and because of how bad the opposing offense is, they'll be able to throw out some of their more offensive-centric players, like Duncan Robinson for added juice. And this is where they'll be able to get back to what they like to do most, sitting in gaps, forcing turnovers, even throwing out some zone to make things really tough on Jamal. That leaves just a few lasting points of emphasis. With Jokic on the floor, they do a great job of pressuring the paint without volume driving, through post-ups, rolls, cuts, and even offensive rebounds. Although Miami lacks size, they're incredible at boxing out, leading the playoffs at more than 13 a game. And this is how they countered New York's strategy of hunting for second chance opportunities. Denver's on a completely different level though, scoring 51.5 points in the paint per game. What's maybe most impressive though is how they create these opportunities without turning the ball over. Typically there's a pretty decent trade-off between active ball movement and paint touches with turnovers, but they're dead last in the playoffs in both live ball and overall turnovers. So this will be something big to watch for, as a product of Miami's aggressive style of defense is that they force a lot of them. They're second in both deflections and forced live ball turnovers, and this is also how they get into a ton of their offense, scoring more than 19 points a game, more than any other team. But to round out everything I've touched on, I think Denver's major keys on offense start with getting the ball to Jokic cleanly, and giving him proper space to operate against Bam one-on-one to force Miami into picking their poison. Also find ways to get Gordon involved in the half court, not just as another scoring weapon, but to keep Jimmy engaged and away from his role as a free safety. Weaponize Porter, as he's a walking matchup issue for a Miami squad that struggles with size and can offer a major scoring punch. Pressure the paint as much as possible, both on and off the ball, to force the Heat into rotation and get outside shooters clean looks. And lastly, protect the ball to not let Miami get out and run. To counter, Miami's keys on defense start with making Jokic work to get the ball wherever he is on the floor. Once he does get it, keep him guessing. Don't telegraph help, because he'll take advantage with his passing, and there's not enough rim protection on the floor to save plays. Close out hard, don't give them any clean looks, and make weaker playmakers put the ball down, but rotate to keep the ball away from the paint and make them play on the perimeter. Avoid switching as much as possible, not just actions with Jokic, but with Gordon and Porter as well. This team will attack mismatches. Take Jamal out of his comfort zone when he has the ball. Make him punish the defense with tough passes over the top and play those lanes. And finally, box out hard. Do not give this offense second chance opportunities. Before we talk about the other side of the floor, I want to give a quick shout out to Basketball Index for helping with this analysis. If you're not familiar with the site, they provide tons of statistical measurements, tools, and easily accessible graphics. They also offer various different talent grades, and through their player profiles tab, I can easily compare them to other players around the league. Using Jokic's playmaking as an example, on this page I'm presented with various metrics detailing his ability to create for others, along with how he stacks up against his peers. By signing up with the code VENUE30, you can get 30% off your first month subscription, so I'll leave a link in the description below for anyone interested. And with that being said, let's take a look at Miami's offense and how Denver can potentially counter. I talked about how they like to force turnovers and get out and run that way, but Denver not only protects the ball, but has an elite transition defense. While Miami leads the playoffs in points off of turnovers, the Nuggets lead in preventing opponent points off of turnovers, so I fully expect the game to slow down a lot. And this caters to the Heat, as they like to play at a super slow pace in the half court. Their primary approach is tons of pick and roll and dribble handoff action in the middle of the floor, with a pretty big variety in ball handlers. Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry are big off the dribble 3-point guys, while Max Strus and Duncan Robinson are the movement shooters, and all four can make pocket passes to the roll man, which is a pretty big deal. The Nuggets will likely hedge most of these screens, and if the ball gets to Bam in the short roll, he's shown to be a good enough decision maker to take advantage. This will put Denver into a constant scramble, and their closeouts and rotations are going to have to be incredibly sharp because of how much shooting and off-the-dribble capabilities Miami's roster has. Quite literally, every single player in their rotation can make plays and extend advantages. Their other ball handler coming off of screens is of course Jimmy Butler, and he's the more methodical, patiently getting to his spots for a mid-range jumper or drive guy, and he's the only one who's really a huge threat to pressure the rim. I fully expect Jokic to be in a deep drop when it's Jimmy handling, just doing what he can to not give up layups, and living with some of the results on longer twos. The Nuggets do a good job of not letting the ball get all the way to the rim, but in that, they tend to give up the short mid-range to rollers, and Jokic isn't vertical enough to really bother these shots. Whether it's in a hedge or a drop, Bam will have access to these looks, and it's his favorite area of the floor, going to pull-up jumpers or floaters over the top of defenders. He'll have to be careful about how and when he gathers, as Jokic is going to hunt for those swipe downs. But if his decision making is on point, this could be a really big offensive series for him. Another interesting wrinkle in their offense is how Butler uses screens from guards or wings to hunt for favorable switches, and Denver cannot give up the soft switch because of how good he is in isolation. So I would probably expect lots of hedging, but it has to be on point because of Miami's shooters. When Jimmy does isolate, the Heat have perfect spacing principles, so these will be one-on-one possessions, and I think Aaron Gordon's equipped for the matchup. The difficulty and versatility in who he had to match up with throughout their Western Conference run can't possibly be overstated, and I actually think you can make the argument that he was made in a lab to defend Jimmy. Butler likes to create with strength and physicality. He checks both of those boxes. He also likes to play off of 2 feet in the paint. Gordon's one of the most explosive 2-foot leapers in the game. He likes to rise up over the top of defenders in the short mid-range. Gordon has both the length and timing to smother these looks. There is one problem though. Gordon does tend to foul at times, and Jimmy's one of the best we've ever seen at getting to the line, so that's something to really keep an eye on. While isolations and ball screens do take up a chunk of their offense, I don't want to understate how much action they run off the ball. Lots of movement, misdirections, and extra passing. They have multiple initiators and versatile finishers, and like to run through Bam in a similar way to Denver with Jokic as a sort of big man passing hub. Although the Nuggets have some good screen navigators, they don't have enough to defend without bringing multiple bodies into the action, and I fully expect the Heat to run a lot more offense through their movement shooters and attack laterally, as opposed to on-ball Jimmy like we've seen in previous series. And this is so they can bring Jokic to the level of screens, putting the defense in recovery mode. They will create advantages, and it'll come down to a matter of whether or not they can capitalize with their shooting. In the regular season, they were far from what you would consider a 3-point shooting team, but in the playoffs, it's been a matter of hot and cold, winning 2 series where they were heavy underdogs in large part due to torching the defense from deep. Denver's done a great job of defending the three-point line in these playoffs, and I think Miami has to hit a lot of threes to keep up with their scoring. So, another thing to watch for. And if they're missing, they will not have second chances. The Nuggets completely clean the defensive glass, so capitalizing on the looks you get is imperative. Also, because of that rebounding, it's probably in the Heat's best interest to not even crash the offensive glass at all. Denver's scoring almost 17 fast break points a game, and these aren't really off of turnovers like Miami, instead securing defensive rebounds and looking for quick outlets or grabbing and going. The Heat have to get back and make them play in the half court while avoiding cross-matching. Do not let an offense like the Nuggets gain any sort of easy advantage. As for Miami's keys on offense, they need to run through their shooters and force Jokic to the level of screens so that they can create advantages, while making quick decisions off the catch to extend those and create open looks. They have to capitalize on said looks. Shooting has a ton of variability, and they'll need to make their threes. They also need to look to get the ball to Bam downhill so that he can attack in this short mid-range, because the opportunities will be there. And once shots go up, get back in transition to properly set your defense. To counter, Denver's rotations behind the play have to be timely to prevent the ball from getting to the rim. Also, they need to close out hard on shooters and chase off-ball movers off the three-point line. Make these guys play inside the arc. Don't let Jimmy switch hunt, and don't send him or anyone else to the line. Make them earn tough shots. That leads me to my final predictions and expectations. I feel that this will be a slower paced series, so scoring totals won't be too extreme, but the offensive efficiency on both sides should look really good, especially if Tyler Hero makes a return. I think both Jokic and Bam should have big numbers as scorers based on how the defense approaches them. And it's important to keep in mind that Denver has both the home court advantage at altitude and a lot more rest. I think Denver takes the first two at home, getting out to a 2-0 lead. In either game 3 or 4, Miami has a hot shooting night and outscores them. Then Denver takes it back home and closes it out in 5. Now, this is just if I had to put money on a prediction. I can see a ton of different outcomes, and this certainly is not a cakewalk for Denver. I'm also not Erik Spoelstra, so I'm sure there are a countless amount of creative ways for Miami to gain advantages that better basketball minds can come up with. But where I stand is Nuggets in 5, winning the first championship in franchise history. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of these teams and what your predictions are for the series. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.